everybody. I know we're all coming from various sites in the world. And welcome to the Global Conversations by the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, this one entitled Biennial or Biennale and its others. I seem to interchange those words. I'm Amanda Coulson. I'm the Executive Director of the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas for 7 more hours. And I'm welcoming the panelists tonight. So I'd like to welcome Bonaventure Ndikung. Dr. Bonaventure Ndikung is an independent curator, author, and biotechnologist. He is founder and artistic director of Savvy Contemporary in Berlin and the artistic director of Sonsbeek 2024, a quadrennial of contemporary art exhibition in Arnhem, the Netherlands. He is currently a professor in the Spatial Strategies MA program at Weissensee Academy of Art, Berlin. I'd also like to welcome Zak Ové, an artist whose 2-minute video we saw of the Mothership Connection at the beginning. Zak is a London-based multidisciplinary artist working in film, sculpture, and photography to reclaim old world mythologies in new world materials and technologies. His fascination with the interplay between antiquity and the future is inspired by masking, rituals, and traditions of Trinidadian carnival that is itself rooted in a struggle for emancipation. His use of non-traditional materials situates the work in the metropoles of Europe and the Americas, where they merge and mutate into endless possibilities and unexpected identities. And last, but definitely not least, David Scott, who is the Ruth and William Lubick Professor and Chair of the Department of Anthropology at Columbia University. More recently, he's authored Omens of Diversity, Tragedy, Time, Memory, Justice in 2014. And in 2017, Stuart Hall's Voice, Intimations of an Ethics of Receptive Generosity. Scott is the founder and editor of the journal Small Acts and director of the Small Acts Project. He's also the curatorial director of the exhibition, The Visual Life of Social Affliction, which we hosted at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. It was a wonderful show. And he's also the curator of the forthcoming Kingston Biennial 2021. I struggle with the word. I either say Biennale or Biennale. And we are here again to discuss biennales, I'm going to call them. Sorry, that's what I grew up with. And what they mean for our region, and our region being generally the Caribbean and the global South. So I have a series of questions. I'm just going to throw them out there. If someone's not talking, I will try and get you in, but really it's just a conversation for everybody to participate in. And the first thing I really wanted to ask was about the term biennial and like what it means to us. You know, we know they were founded as these every 2 years, and we'll include quadrennials and triennials in this discussion because it's really just a time factor. And they started out as very nationalistic things to sort of represent nationhood, and then became more kind of global and broad-ranging, and now, so they say, where we are on the periphery, and that's why I started with that cartoon. I don't know. I saw some of you kind of looking like this. It was a cartoon by Pablo Helguera, who I love, and it looks like someone out, in the jungle somewhere, speaking to people wearing grass skirts, and there's a guy in a suit with little glasses, and the caption is, he says he's curating a biennial and wants to know if anybody here does video. Because there seems to be this sort of fascination now with pushing out to what is called by the Western world the periphery. So I really wanted to ask you, who are all involved in biennials, what does that brand mean to you, the word biennial? Because it's become a brand in a way. You put it on the end of the city name, and suddenly it means something different to an encyclopedic show, such as the one Zak just curated in London, Get Up, Stand Up. What makes it different to you, and what's the value of that term and that exhibition? Bonaventure, I'm going to start with you because you're involved in curating biennials and quadrennials.
Thanks, Amanda. It's a great pleasure to be with you all. Good to see David again and Zak. I'm happy to be here. What does the term mean to me? It means nothing, absolutely nothing. So I'm invited to do projects somewhere. I go and try to fulfill something I propose to them, but especially I try to situate myself within a particular context. Work with artists, from around the world, bring something there, but try to also, get into an exchange with the people there. So the brand in itself, the mark, means little or nothing to me. But what does mean something to me is engaging with particular histories, So I was fortunate to do the 12th edition of the Bamako Biennial, which was founded in 94. And so we did 25th anniversary of the biennial in 2019. Trip into the unknown. Something comes out of it, and then history tells.
I suppose by that it's not top down, it's bottom up, which it sounds like what you're interested.
The sense of, I guess, being contrived in a way is something that you need to be very careful of in terms of how you select work and what the discussions become. It was nice listening to Bonaventure just now. I remember being in Bamako for the Biennial there, and it was one of the first ones I'd attended, but it was very well organized. And for me, it was of massive benefit to be able to meet other players in the field, great artists who had revered amazing ways of speaking through their work, and to learn from them also. So it is kind of twofold in terms of getting it right, I think. That's the really important side.
Absolutely. Because I think sometimes, really, I suppose what I meant by that question was you feel like that some cities are thinking about it as they might think about trying to get the Olympics, that they feel like it's going to, bring something to the economy, mean something for tourism, and they have all these reasons to do it, and they want to just call it a biennial because they think that will create an interest level. And that brings me to Kingston Biennial. So it's your turn next, David, because they did, like the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, for many, many years had a national exhibition, which was I believe theirs was every 2 years, might have been, I think, every 2 years. I know ours is. And that is sort of our little, in our smaller space, something like our biennial that we do every 2 years. And I know the National Gallery of Jamaica did that too. Uh-huh. And now it's rebranded, or it seems as though that's what happened. So what was that discussion about, David, and what's changing, and what are you bringing to the table, and what's your vision for going from the National Gallery National Exhibition to the Kingston Biennial? And I also remember it was the Jamaica Biennial, and that's the Kingston Biennial. So I'm interested in that development, if you can speak to it. Don't forget to turn your mic on,
Thanks, Amanda. And it was wonderful hearing Bonaventure and wonderful hearing Zak. Where to begin? There is a conversation, obviously, within the National Gallery of Jamaica that I won't myself speak to, and an ongoing conversation that has to do with transformations of direction and reconceptualizations of the vision of the National Gallery. And I welcomed the invitation to be part of the conception of a new biennial, and gratefully, there wasn't an attempt to impose on me conceptual parameters. Obviously, budgetary parameters were very stringently imposed on me, and budget is understandably a crucial part of this entire conversation when we're talking about an exhibition.
Most definitely.
As ambitious as what a biennial presumably expects to be. I want to begin though with, I very much liked the sense that both Bonaventure and Zak suggest to us, that the sense that a biennial, the brand biennial is in some sense an empty signifier. I mean, obviously there are canonical histories of biennials from the late 19th century to the present, and one can talk about the various kinds of historicizations of the biennial. I think for all of us here in this conversation, what really matters is the way in which we rupture those canonical histories and take aspects of, elements of that history and transform it in directions that we think is appropriate for the projects at hand. And so, I mean, that was certainly what I imagined when the invitation came to me. At the same time, I think that biennials, what excited me partly was the sense, and obviously this comes out of the work in small acts, my sense that that in our parts of the world, there is a sense that the emergence of these kinds of exhibitions are part of a larger transformation, a much larger transformation in which there are very, very evident shifts in the way in which visual vocabularies play in larger conceptual critical discourses. And the biennial, it seems to me, offers the potential to stage kinds of conversations, as both, I think, Bonaventure and Zak are suggesting, kinds of dialogues that are situated, thematized, and that engage the relationship between visual artistic production and the worlds in which we live. And I think that's a challenge that is, presents us with possibilities, presents us with constraints, but is part of a larger set of interventions in contemporary visual culture that we should grasp with our two hands and wade into.
Thank you, David. You actually sort of led into the next question. You started addressing it a little bit, and that was really that biennials arose from a very particular colonial model, and one that was very much aligned, its narrative was aligned with industrialized sort of capitalistic nationhood. Very often, historically, they're supported by robust economic systems, by states, cities, institutions, or corporations. Of course, many are becoming more and more commercialized in a way as we need to address budget issues, which you spoke to. Then we also have cities, major cities that now have defunct biennales. So Tokyo is an example, Paris, Melbourne. So how do we expect our cities and our nations, which generally are struggling economically, many of them, I mean, even though Trinidad's maybe a bit better off than some because of your oil, but generally in the Caribbean, we don't have governments that support these kind of things, or cities or mayors of cities. They require enormous organization, finance, and partnerships. Are we rushing into the fray in an effort to be international or an effort to be seen playing at a specific level that could actually be a huge risk to ourselves? And is there another possible model? So who wants to take that question?
Where do you want to begin now? In reverse order or in the same order?
In reverse order. I think, you know what, I'll start with Zak this time because he's on my screen there. And so Zak,
okay.
Why don't you take that one?
I mean, it's a difficult question. Sorry, could you just repeat exactly what? Well, really, you're asking me to.
We're going to have to get to pull these off. You need a lot of money. Generally, you need a lot of money. So there's a risk in that, because there's a risk in bringing people to the table who expect it to be something that maybe we don't want it to be.
Well, I mean, listen, prior to this, by example, one of the things that was interesting to me was something like the Fringe Festival, which I was involved with in Senegal. Very, very, very different to Bamako, although still on the same continent in terms of the overspend that we discussed, right? Which led to 3 huge warehouses of artworks that had been flown in, not shipped in, that couldn't be shown because they'd amassed too many from too many people. The backlash of that was obviously that it took nearly 4 years to get the work back because the government refused to pay for the return trips. I mean, that was everyone from William Kentridge, Yinka Shoni Barry, you name it. We were all stuck in the same boat, not able to get works back. I believe during that one, they had cut power in half the country to pay for it also, and then tiered the guests into different fraternities of existence, the lowest of which were disease-ridden, and then blockades of police from blocking you getting in or out. So that was a complete mess and a travesty in that sense. But at the same time, like many of these situations, the fascinating thing is that you're all there, right? Is that all these artists are suddenly in the room together, right? And regardless of the circumstance, it's an incredible opportunity to exchange, to learn from one another, to see works and be able to discuss those works with the makers. So for me, it's twofold. If you get it right, it's fantastic. If you don't get it right, maybe there's still something to galvanize from the experience and take away. You know, one of the important things for me in Get Up, Stand Up was creating a hub for people to identify with each other and find one another. And I think sometimes these events are fantastic for that in terms of how they attract like-minded people who want that kind of exchange and come looking for it. So it's tricky. And obviously it's very dependent on finance.
Yeah, and I just worry that in our region, you know, we are biting off things that maybe we might end up in a similar situation, that you think you can pull it off for a certain amount, but you end up again with containers full of work you can't return. Bonaventure, have you, you've worked on a few. Certainly, I know there was a.
You know, the thing about finances, Amanda, sorry, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's really everywhere. I've been, chance to work with the Documenta 14 that happened in Athens and in Kassel, which I was curator at large. And we had an overspending of, I don't remember, 7 million euros. And Documenta was founded in 1955. So, and it's in Kassel, in Germany. So you would think that they would get it right?
Yeah.
But it was still a bunch of chaos. I'm just saying, it's not from our regions. It's just how it. I'm doing 2 editions of Sonsbeck. Sonsbeck was founded in 1949, right? So it's the 3rd oldest large-scale exhibition in the world after Venice, Whitney. Then you have Sonsbeck, right? And I tell you that we're still having financial difficulties. It's not about, and it's also, as much as we try to package it well, sell it, do the marketing stuff, it's a tough run.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, doing something in Dakar is tough and in Bamako, but, it's generally difficult. Now, it's also a question of scale, right?
It is, definitely.
Because if you look at what Sami Baloji and co are doing in Lubumbashi in Congo, they're doing a brilliant biennial, and they're not trying to be Venice Biennial. They're not trying to be anything else. They're doing Lubumbashi Biennial. And I think there's something fantastic in that, very engaged, very conscious of where they are and what discourses they would like to, as David mentioned earlier, to put in the fore, right? You can look at the example of the Kampala Biennial, which even in its form, very different, It's not about coming to show works. It's inviting people to do workshops. Zak mentioned the hub, creating possibilities of people to meet and work together, exchange.
Yeah. I think very important.
In such biennials, in such large-scale exhibitions. So we have to always ask ourselves the question, what is it for and for whom?
And how are you answering those questions in Kingston, David?
Well, since I'm in the middle of that...
and thank you, Bonaventure. That was a great...
Those are hard, very present, very material questions that are unfolding. So I won't get into the details of that for obvious reasons, but I think that there is a fundamental question in post-colonial societies like ours about priorities, obviously, and states involved, governments involved in projects like biennials are clearly going to be very concerned with the bottom line. But where I begin in some sense is with a remark made a long time ago by a very eminent Trinidadian intellectual, Lloyd Best, who once said, "It is often said," he said, "that it's because we are poor that we don't have the best libraries. But I think it's the reverse. Because we are poor, we should have the best libraries." And I think that's important for us to hold on to. And what's crucial, I think, here is the willingness of states and corporate sponsors and other kinds of financial institutions, philanthropic and otherwise, to commit to these kinds of ventures. I think the idea, for example, of public art funds that are precisely for ventures that enhance the public lives of people in cities and the places that we come from is important to think about. So I think obviously bottom lines always constrain and crowd us, and we are pulling our hair out to try and manage how we get work to and from biennial locales. But I think that we nevertheless have to commit to the idea of the biennial as a visionary, as one among many kinds of locales in which to stage kinds of artistic work, aesthetic conversations, cultural political conversations. Because one of the interesting things, it seems to me, about the biennial form, whether it be triennials or documenters, is that they provide occasions for kinds of self-reflection, kinds of engagement, both with the worlds around us, with our states. They ask hard questions and they ask us to ask hard questions. So in that context, obviously, in each instance, one has to think about the relationship between one's ambition and one's budget. So it was a huge question for me when I was invited to curate the Kingston Biennial. What is the budget? And it took a long time for the response to come back to me. And when it came, it wasn't exactly what I would have liked, but nevertheless, we persevere. And the Kingston Biennial will be a very, very small biennial. There will be under 30 artists. It will be a conversation through Kingston. There will be Jamaican artists in Jamaica and abroad, and we will endeavor to generate through artists who are producing work for the biennial, as well as artists who have had work that has not been seen in Jamaica, present work. And we will hope to generate a kind of conversation without too much anxiety, I hope, that we are falling short of some abstract standard of what a biennial should be.
What you in terms of
you're breaking up, Amanda.
Conversations, I'm sorry. Technical difficulties. Am I back?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. What you described for the biennial, I really feel like that's something regional institutions should be doing anyhow, like all the time.
In what respect? You mean?
So, engaging their audience with critical conversation,
yes.
Discussing topic. We hosted your show, Visual Life of Social Affliction, and that's not uncommon to the kind of programming we do at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. So I feel, I suppose I worry that maybe the biennial will be a way for institutions to say, oh, we've done that thing where we reach out to our audience. Now let's go back and stick to our regularly scheduled.
Yes, but we are involved in creative, sometimes agonistic relationships with our institutions, the institutions that we ourselves are part of. And I think that if we think of ourselves as critical intellectuals, we have an obligation, clearly, to be trying to expand the contours that constrain us. Yes, institutions are bound to certain kinds of protocols and priorities. And I think we have to be about the business of trying to engage and change those priorities and protocols in the directions that we think best enhance the kinds of conversations, the kinds of publics and audiences that we think should be engaged. And I think that's an ongoing issue that, alas, we are not going to be able to escape.
Yeah.
Well, I'm fascinated to find out what the conversations will be at the Kingston Biennale in context, I guess, to Kingston and Jamaica.
Yes, well, Zak, so am I.
All right, good. You're not giving anything away there.
So he's being very tight-lipped.
Yeah, very much so.
No. I'm not being deliberately evasive. I mean, we are still obviously, and we are constrained by the pandemic situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are very much in planning, programming, and so on. We have the artists in place, and we are exploring how to get the work to Kingston, and that's complicated in a variety of ways. But we are going to keep faith with hope and expect that the artists and the work will be in Kingston in come December.
Great. Well, I actually have two questions about two things you brought up. And one is, bringing works in, and this is for everybody, and maybe I'll start this time with Bonaventure because he's been quiet for a bit, is that, we're living in a time where we're extremely concerned about sustainability, especially when you're in a country like mine where we're 2 feet above sea level, and we just had Hurricane Dorian last year. So, creating things, shipping things, flying things around the world, flying people down, these are all like massive carbon footprint things. Do we as a group think this is still a sustainable model forever to do that? Or are you trying to push to be more local and to be more, not be finding across the world to be at a specific biennial? Bonaventure, I'm going to give that to you first. How are you thinking about sustainability in your practice?
Well,
in creation of biennales?
I mean, we all want to be sustainable, and we're all trying to do something to make, all thinking of our planet, right? And so, but I'll put it this way. Of course, we should try to fly in less people and so on and so forth. But I also don't want to live in a world where the only contact we have is like this. I want to come to Kingston. I want to be there, be in a discussion with you, have a glass of wine, look at the art, experience it. So that's said. Yeah. I think I'll answer your question with an anecdote. For the Bamako Biennial, first of all, Mali has an incredible history of photography that is as old as the history of photography itself. And, the city of Bamako alone had 20 plus, photo laboratories and printers before the founding of the biennial in 1994. After the founding of the biennial in 1994, the number of printers went down. So you would actually think that the biennial would increase the possibilities. But no, everything was produced in France. Everything was produced abroad and shipped. So one of the things we did in the last edition of the biennial was to say, no, we're not going to do that, which was extremely difficult to realize, right? So we said, we'll try to produce everything in Mali. Now, this is a wish, but the reality is a different one. So we could find just 2 functioning printers in a city that had 20 plus 25 years ago. So you understand. So a biennial is not just, it's bringing the people, it's also the economic aspect is also very important. The ecology of, artistic ecology is in itself very important. So what we had to do was to find these people to do the printing. And to print 2,500 prints is not an easy thing to do. You need paper, you need ink. These are practicalities, you know. But if you just come in from afar, you don't think about these things. Now, but we succeeded in doing that. And I think that's an important. So I remember being in a press conference in Bamako and journalists asking me, you know, we understand why you are doing this, but are you sure the quality in Mali would be as good? I mean, these are people in Mali asking that question. And I told them, I'm just flying in from Berlin, and the quality of the print I saw in Bamako was better than what I saw in Berlin, because the people know how to do the by case basis.
No, I always say it's better to fly people than to fly objects. So we try to do that here because, again, we have struggles on this tiny little island with everything has to come in. What about you, David? How are you thinking? Are you thinking about that in terms of the biennial and in that idea of what it's doing to the environment and how you can build things locally rather than fly them in?
Yes, and we have at least one artist who will be coming from New York, and the work and materials for the work are currently being sourced in Jamaica. That's not the case with everyone, of course. And I think all of us are broadly concerned with, not just constrained by, but positively concerned with the question of what Bonaventure just called the sort of larger ecology of art production, art installation, art movement, etc. But you know, I think that it's important for us, even those of us who are involved in biennials, not to fetishize the form. I think that they have and have had a kind of creative possibility, but those kinds of creative possibilities are likely not to last forever. I think what's important here is that we try to invest in those modes of creative visual work that oblige us to explore the institutional forms available, that oblige us to expand and transform those institutional forms that are available into ways to bend them in ways that enable us to do the kind of work that we imagine, which includes clearly exploring environment. There are a number of pieces in the Kingston Biennial that would be very directly concerned with the question of the environment, with the coast, for example, with parts of the living spaces of the cockpit country where maroon populations have lived for centuries. So we are very directly concerned with those kinds of questions, which is partly why the theme pressure enabled us to be as capacious as possible in inviting in different kinds of conversations about contemporary dimensions of social suffering, adversity, and so on. One aspect clearly of which is the environment. So I think that's an important question, which we won't resolve entirely with the kinds of art projects that we are engaged in. And I think that we do nevertheless have to commit to being involved in the conversation, but to being creatively explore ways of overcoming those constraints is what I want to say. You're muted.
I'm on mute. Do you want to add anything, Zach? You've got giant works shipped all over the world.
Yeah, no, well, actually, that big giant work hasn't been shipped anywhere. It's exactly where it was built. It hasn't moved.
It's supposed to get shipped, though, isn't it?
Well, that's another conversation. The sculpture park it was made for is since shut due to COVID. They're not going to open. And I think this was part of a string of works that they were advantageous enough to commission that now have to find new homes. I'm trying to find a local home for that work in the UK if possible. and then we'll see. If not, maybe somebody will be interested abroad. But just listening to the conversation, it's interesting to me because I was wondering, how does an event like Frieze take these concerns not only into what it shows, but into how it operates, quite literally? I mean, ironically, my fabricator every year put the Frieze Art Fair up and stored all the flats, etc., etc. But how do big Western biennales or big Western art fairs actually commit to making changes that really affect what we're talking about, you know, in terms of shipping, for instance? Because it seems to me that their measure to challenge this situation is only in what they show and not how they operate. So again, when it comes to the production and the budget and the shipping and the showing and the lighting and the manning, it's the same format. It cannot not be. And I think one of the questions I was wondering was, you know, it's difficult that as small islands and as people trying to break through with Caribbean contemporary art and Black contemporary art into a much bigger Western colonial pit in that sense. One of the things that's very important is to be seen. And one often feels in the Caribbean there are very high walls in place in terms of how young artists actually get their work in front of important curators globally for that moment to be recognized. And we hope that these situations are an attempt for that work to be recognized and to become influencers of the future. So I guess I'm interested in, it's twofold, isn't it? It's kind of, I don't know, the chicken and the egg, but how do you really address that in so many ways? If you clamp the environmental issue too hard in terms of the production, then there is no show. I mean, that much is obvious. And the other issue you've got there, you're away from where this, you know, the big center cities. To become successful in the arts, you really have to be in London, New York, or somewhere like that has that kind of pivot where you can walk in and out of galleries on a regular basis to make those relationships. It's very difficult from the Caribbean to be seen. And I think it's very important that we have events for local artists to be recognized in and from. And maybe part of the discussion within the work has to deal with that. But I think there's no way around the shipping costs with these kind of ventures.
Yeah, no, there isn't. But in a way that brings you back in a way to the opening question, which is like, I think I agree with you that we need these kind of events, and that's why we're all interested in them. We're always, you know, because again, where I am, artists are always saying, "Oh, do you have an artist in residency program?" And I say, "Listen, the last thing we need in the Bahamas is more artists. What we need is curators. What we need is writers.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you get them down here?" But again, I think the frustration is that, you know, we believe we're making shows all year that people should get on a plane to come see, and we have to put Biennale on it to make people get excited. So I think that's sort of what ties back to my first question in a way. And also with this, like the work we should be doing on the daily with our communities. Should we be waiting for a biennial to have the critical conversations and the, so I mean,
I guess one of the other questions I've got from my kind of busted standpoint was, how do you engage in something bigger throughout the islands? Because it seems to me it's very fractionalized otherwise. You know, and understand that Jamaica wants to put a podium in place for its national champions, and the Bahamas wants to do the same, and Trinidad and Barbados want to do the same. But in a bigger remit, you're much stronger in some unity that brings all of those conversations into one room, and that's what I would be excited to see in the future.
You know, I'm going to jump in here, Amanda, if you don't mind, because I hear what Zak is saying, although I come at it from a slightly different angle or maybe even perspective. I mean, I think that the question of Caribbean conversations in the region and how one Caribbean island state deals with the other is an old question that certainly won't be resolved by biennials or any kind of art exhibition.
My comment wasn't...
No, I know that, Zak. I know that.
It was commonality.
Right, but you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the current moment is that without making any assumptions about Zak's age or Amanda's age, you know, I can think of just in relation to me that there's a younger generation of Caribbean artists who operates in the region in a way that as a young person, had I been a visual artist, I would not be able to operate, who are in and out of those island spaces and who are participating in a far more generative and concrete way in art institutes, in art education, in exhibitions with gallerists and so on, in a much wider, I think, way than was the case 30 or 40 years ago. So there is, I think, a shifting terrain in the Caribbean that in which the movement and in which the making of art worlds is taking place in a somewhat different way. Also, you know, it's always been remarkable to me that, I mean, I'm obviously operating from New York, but and Small Axe this year is 25 years old. And Small Axe has been by and large supported by art institutions, visual art institutions. No one is contributing money to the production of the staging of Caribbean scholarly or literary life, but people are interested in what's going on in Caribbean visual culture. And I think that that's a shift, part of a larger shifting terrain of which the biennial interest is one moment, but not the only moment. And I think that we have to, again, not fetishize the biennial, but try to place it in a wider context of the transformation of visual art production and reception in Caribbean work.
I really like what you said, David. Yes, we shouldn't fetishize the biennial, and there is much more happening, and I really concur. I would shift from the Caribbean, which is of course important, but to give a few other examples happening around the world. So if you look at what is happening in Ghana, for example, in the north of Ghana, what Ibrahim Mahama and cohort of brilliant young artists, you know, younger than me, most of them coming from the same school, so from the KNUST, you know, mostly all of them went through one professor, Professor Caricature, and the group of brilliant artists all decided to base themselves in Ghana and working internationally. Working also there, Ibrahim Mahama has, in Tamale, in the north, has built an incredible art space, building an art school. So these are guys selling everywhere in the world, at the Documenta, at the Venice Biennial, and everywhere, and to bring the money and create institutions. To create possibility of people to come in to do crit classes, you know, to exchange, you know, they can invite these important curators and artists to come there. It's not a biennial, but they're doing incredible work. And when I invited one of them to come to be part of my curatorial team in Bamako, he got 20 of them to come with him. You know, so there were 20 people coming from Ghana to Mali for the opening of the biennial. And I thought this was just fantastic, you know. We could look at other examples. You look at what guys are doing in Yaoundé, Rencontre Art Visuel de Yaoundé, called Ravi. Now, this is a biennial. It's a performance art biennial, right? It's incredible work for the past 12 years, right? They're not that known, but to get artists to come, and the local art scene has been incredibly informed by these impulses, you know. So looking at the history of performance art, of performativity at large within the Cameroonian context, and the influences from these other places, from Canada, Japan, and so on, you know, and they've built a very important structure there. So I really think that it's not really what the biennial is, but what it can do. You know, what can it actually perform within particular spaces, you know? And that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I was going to hop in, but I'm glad you both did when Zach said, you have to go to London and New York now. And I think that's what I think probably, we're showing our age a bit because maybe that was the truth 20 or 30 years ago. But I think now, even here, that's not the truth anymore. And I think that's what we're all trying to build in our institutions and with the biennial, is that, for me, that's very important, that Bahamian artists can stay in the Bahamas and have their career. And LeVar Monroe does come back and he does produce here in his little, we call them Junkanoo shacks. He has a shack in his backyard where he makes work that goes all over the world. So again, I think that's the sort of end goal, really, is that we're no longer peripheral in that way. And people don't say it. The reason I started with that cartoon as well, that Pablo Helguera cartoon of the people in the grass skirts, is that, that is something we're all fighting against, I think, is this idea of who we are when we come from these different spaces. I remember somebody not walking out, that was the point. They didn't go in. They walked past the Bahamas Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and they looked up at the sign and they said, oh, the Bahamas, what next? The Congo? And then they kept walking. And I just was so enraged. And of course, it's because we branded up.
That's a lesson of energy. Don't be enraged. Laugh at it and move on.
I did. In the end, I laughed. I did. You're right. But it's just
Amanda, just to interrupt. Something similar happened to me. I was doing the Finland Pavilion in Venice.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
I have no relationship to Finland, but I was invited to do Finland Pavilion, and I was interviewed by Arte, European TV. And, it was around this tone. And I was trying to be honest about it, that it's been a long time I haven't seen anything significant happen in Venice. Really, to be honest with you, So we've never really been peripheral. Never, I'm sorry, So, I mean, there's so much, important stuff happening in Lubumbashi at the biennial there that you won't see in Venice, So, but at the end of the day, we should shift from these comparisons, People do what they do in their localities, and the urgencies within those spaces, the agencies that the artists have, that the artworks have within particular spaces. And, whatever they say, I mean, there's this, the word in German is Überbleibsel, like remnants of this kind of colonial arrogance. I mean, nobody has time and interest for that. I couldn't, waste a second on those. No.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Someone asked me once if we had art there, and I just said, well, normally my experience is where there are humans, there's art. So that's my experience. So I think that's what we're all trying to build. I mean, wouldn't you agree, David, in terms of developing Jamaica and Kingston, is that we're creating these opportunities so our artists can stay where they're from. Oh, did I freeze again?
No,
you're not frozen.
Okay. We've actually got a question coming in from the audience because we've almost up on our hour. So I've got a question from the audience that I'll give you. It's from Suzanne Fredericks. In thinking about cultivating a sense of the regional, what kind of models do you think could achieve this successfully? I think Bonaventure sort of spoke to that, but does anyone want to take that? Zach, do you want to take that?
No, you go ahead.
David?
Yes, I think I think Suzanne's question is a recognizable question. And it's an extremely difficult question, given the nature of nation-state cultural political development in the Caribbean, which has been largely insular. Whatever we think of the regional character of the University of the West Indies or something called West Indian literature or West Indian cricket, we are insular, and that insularity has been part of the construction of the whole anti-colonial enterprise and the building of these states. And none of this is significantly undone by, the top-down institution of CARICOM. And so, yes, I think that there are conversations that ought to happen in a cross-island character and between the region and its diasporas, clearly. But I am, of the view that we have to begin where we are, and that we have to try to build out from where we are, and that those conversations have, in some sense, to emerge organically. And in a variety, as you know well, Amanda, in a variety of Caribbean island spaces, there are new kinds of sites of artist production, and those artists are moving around in the region. How to expand from there, how to build up or scale up, as people say, from there into wider and wider conversations is a matter of doing it, in some sense, less a matter of theorizing it, but of doing it, of reaching out. And it's part of the story of Small Acts is that story, that it's a conversation that began for me inside of the people who are around me in Kingston. But Small Acts is now involves very, very systemically not just the Anglophone Caribbean, but the Hispanophone Caribbean and the Francophone Caribbean, and increasingly trying to involve the Dutch Caribbean. But I think it is a matter of trying to build and solidify that building and build outwards from where you are. It won't happen in one fell swoop.
Yes, agreed. Absolutely. There's another question that just came in from Verla Pupai. Biennials and festivals are often made by their fringe events. Is there any scope for that with the Kingston Biennial, and how is that being planned for?
So I'll ask Verla to be patient, and the news of all of that is forthcoming. The principal site for the 2021 Kingston Biennial will be the National Gallery in downtown Kingston. Whether or not we hope to have programming that happens in Kingston, but a lot's going to depend on the conditions of the pandemic and what is possible in terms of face-to-face occasions of any sort. And we'll have to see, but I will ask Fairly to be patient.
Yeah. And I wonder, it's a challenge for all of us now in this field. It's like, what do we do if things don't change? You know,
and a lot will depend on the vaccine rollout. And as you know, that's happening not as fast as one would like.
No, because Zak spoke to him again. Some of my best moments with Zak have been, who I feel like he's my best friend, but we've seen each other only a few times, and it's normally in a context like that. And then we hang out all day, and, we have that bonding moment. What do we do if this remains our future? How do we?
Please, no. We need real events.
I think we can all agree to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Another question. I think Bonaventure sort of spoke to this, but we could revisit it. Biennials are often planned over the heads of the communities in which they take place, and make little effort to engage those communities, being very outward looking. What can be done to make biennials more relevant? Oh, my stat just went up. Anyway, make more relevant to the community, to the local audiences. Bonaventure, you want to take that one? Sounds like you've been doing that work already.
Because I have to think about this often. I'll give the example of Sunspec. So one of the reasons to try to do 2 editions, spend really 5 years working in that, city in the Netherlands, was to have the possibility of engaging with the people there. To work with, a group of artists, so 40 we've invited so far, for over a 5 years period of time. That is quite something, right? So telling them from the very onset that the piece you're going to produce for this edition, you would have to produce something else. So it's engaging, and you're engaging with the history of the place, with the people. So we've tried a lot. I tried to build a team also of people that come from there, so to spend time. One of the things that caught my attention immediately, because, when it was founded in 1949, it was meant to be a reconciliation project after the Second World War. So art is a reconciliation. And they said, instead of doing it in museums, we'll take it out to the park, to sculpture. So if you're an important architect or sculptor in the 20th century, you had to show your work in Sandsberg. So I thought that was very interesting to revisit this history, to see in such times of extreme precarity, how can art still be reconciliatory? But the topic I had proposed even before the pandemic was, the title of the project is force times distance, which is the formula for work in physics, So we're thinking about labor, in these times where, people, because of the pandemic can't work, lose their jobs and so on, can't travel, it's become so important, and the people are speaking from there. And one other thing was that getting into these parks, and this lush green, this extreme beauty, one of the things you had to ask yourself was, where did the money actually come from? And then all of a sudden, all these connections to, Suriname, the plantations in Indonesia, and so on. So we had to think about that kind of labor as well, enslavement, indentured labor. And so a possibility of doing that is to engage with the local history, which is regional, but also beyond regional, right? And I think that's the only way one can do it, to really take it seriously, take place seriously, But one gets this accusation all the time. When we were in Athens for Documenta, one of the greatest critiques was, you guys are coming, a German institution, you install yourself here, and you don't really look at what is happening around, which was a legitimate critique, Mm-hmm. Although we're trying to, mm-hmm. But there's just as much as you can do if you have a short time. Mm-hmm. But the only thing I think, in my opinion, is to engage, people around, think from that particular space, and that's what we're trying to do. And if we're going to make it, I don't know, maybe we just try and see what happens.
Mm. So Verla, thank you, Bonaventure. Verla popped back in. She said she meant fringe events organized by others, so that there are multiple voices. So I don't know what the question means. If fringe events will be allowed to be part of the main?
It means, will David be the only curator, or will he invite other curators?
There's a curatorial team. The concentrated locale for the Kingston Biennial 2021 will be the National Gallery, mm-hmm. as a locale. There aren't events, exhibitions that are planned around the city, for example. The National Gallery will be the
we're presenting the works of Abdias do Nascimento from Brazil, one of the most important artists and scholars from Brazil. We're presenting the work of Imran Mir from Pakistan, and so on. As much as we're presenting the works of a 26-year-old, 25-year-old Violet Wami Kutsanai from Zimbabwe. Okay. So it's always, an effort to go beyond, at least in my case, the usual suspects. And it's not, I'm not doing the top of the pop.
Yes.
That's not what I'm interested in.
No, agreed. Yeah. I think also it's very important to put young artists with bigger players so they can be seen side by side and be seen in the same remit, as part of the same family and heritage in that sense, and part of the same movement in terms of how they use materials, in terms of what they speak about. You know, I think collaboration was a big part of Get Up, Stand Up. We were very clear that we wanted big artists to herald the invisible artists alongside them in that context, so that they would be seen with the same value.
I think Charles's question is an important question and a familiar question, and a question that has obviously to be asked over and over again, and is not a completely resolvable question. All exhibitions that involve any significant size and complement of artists are inscribed in institutional structures of power. That's where the funding comes from. That's where the institutional entry comes from. So, you know, I think that we have, again, and there are some kinds of exhibition spaces that are more so than others. And clearly, given what is typically the scale of a biennial, it is much more inscribed in state structures as well as corporate structures of unequal access and unequal power and unequal voice. I think this is crucial, and it's part of the work of the community of people involved in thinking about art discussions and art exhibitions to engage that question at various levels. A biennial, like any other exhibition, is not going to overthrow the structures of power with which we are faced. It seems to me that the potential of the biennial is to enter spaces, to try to have critical conversations about those internal, institutional, and structural dimensions of power, to engage various and varied artistic and critical voices, to challenge conceptions, identity, self-image, and so forth. But the biennial itself is not going to overthrow existing structures of power. The hope may be that artistic work, visual work, as well as other kinds of aesthetic practices will themselves be embedded in cultural political movements that may have something to say about the larger structures of power. Where the Kingston Biennial is concerned, I mean, I like what both Bonaventure and Zak have to say about generations. Generation seems to me important, almost unavoidable to think about in the context, certainly of Caribbean artistic production. In the sense that, again, one can almost feel palpably the shifting generational locale of significant artistic production in the Caribbean. And in the Kingston Biennial, I mean, obviously we are not going to be as successful as we would like to be 100%, but we have placed a significant emphasis on a younger generation. And that is part of a larger discussion that I have wanted to be in about modernism, about what avant-gardes are, about how to think about the contemporary, as ways of rethinking not just art exhibitionary projects, but the very art historical discourses in which these exhibitions are embedded. It's an ongoing, I think, work of critical engagement.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I think this might be our last question. I'm not sure because we're at 20 minutes past the hour, and I think we said we were going to go to half an hour. This is from Tessa Alexander. Speaking of initiatives happening in Africa, how can the Caribbean forge relationships and possible reciprocities with these spaces to create new avenues that are not reliant on the global north? Zak shaking.
Oh, guys. No, I'm putting this to you guys. Good question, Tessa.
It is a good question. David or Bonaventure?
When Bonaventure and I sit down, as we were supposed to have around Velosa, the visual life of social affliction, and alas, it didn't work out. But I think that there are conversations that can potentially happen and should happen. That there are obviously synergies, as one can hear already in this conversation, in which there are similar kinds of predicaments and precarities that we are all navigating around and navigating through in the conjunctures that we inhabit. I think that there's a lot of potential for those conversations, and one is hoping for opportunities, one is hoping for funding, and one is hoping for commitment. But I think those are entirely possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Look, I don't know how to put it, guys. You know, I have never really thought that one can reduce Africa to that piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
I see myself in a genealogy of people that think of the African world, in which the Caribbeans, you know, in a very large degree, belong to.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot imagine doing a biennial on the African continent without artists from the Caribbean. I mean, these alliances are there. They've always been there. You know, I think from the very onset, they've always invited. One of the artists I'm inviting this year for the biennial is Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, and many others. So it's there. We can definitely do more, but we're already doing it, and what is being done has to be acknowledged. First thing. Second thing I would like to say is that now we can write out the global north, but some of us are situated in whatever is called the global north, whether you're in New York or in Berlin or in London, it's what it is. And thinking of this regional and the larger, the local and the global, we cannot take ourselves away from the histories, of the spaces in which we find ourselves. I run an art space that I founded in Berlin 12 years ago called Savvy Contemporary. As you know, the African continent was partitioned in this very city called Berlin in 1884. Right? So we cannot take away these things. I think sometimes we make things too easy, right? So we're working on a project now to revisit Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, 50 years on, which was written in 1972. And we're doing it in Berlin. And it's important to do it here. And Walter Rodney himself created that link, being in Tanzania and working there, teaching there, making these links. So these connections have been there for a very long time. We continue to work on them. Independent of where we find ourselves. I think it's important to do it also in the global north,
Yeah, I agree. I would argue it is important because, again, to be seen, you need to be seen globally. And as you said, there's so many...
Amanda, it's beyond being seen. It's beyond being seen. It's in my opinion, it's an epistemic question. It's about performing knowledge. It's not really about being seen. It's about thinking from particular spaces and making those connections. And that is what the world is, right? I cannot undo the fact that Cameroon is bound to the history of Germany. It's what it is.
Germany and France, yeah, exactly. Well, and there's so many people from our region, from all of these countries we're speaking to that, as you said, end up being German, English, whatever, while having, we're really trying to develop the contacts with Caribbean artists all over the world because they are from the region, even if they were born somewhere else or ended up living I think it's very important to acknowledge that family of connectivity that we have globally. So there's only 4 minutes left, and my computer's telling me my internet connection is unstable. If I could never see that again, I'd be very happy. Any last words, David, on Kingston Biennial?
Well, it's happening. And I hope that is the last word, that it's happening. I sincerely hope that it will happen in conditions that will enable us to have Zak and Bonaventure and others in Kingston with us.
Oh, we'd love that.
That is left to be seen. Budget pending, pandemic pending, and so forth. But yeah.
Do you have plans? I mean, this is probably a whole other conversation that would last more than 5 minutes. What if the pandemic is still here?
Yes.
Are you coming up?
We are in the process of developing contingency plans for, kind of virtual tours and these kinds of Zoom programming conversations, and we will figure ways of making do with what we have.
I really hope we do not have to make do, because I feel like we've been making do for quite some time now. So with that, I want to bring the discussion to a close because we've reached our time contract. I want to thank everyone for participating, also the audience with the fantastic questions they sent in. Again, Bonaventure Ndikung, Zak Ové, and David Scott.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to reconnect with some of you or to meet others. And just thank you. Thank you for your time and your
Thank you so much for the
words.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to the audiences for tuning in, and look out for the Kingston Biennial.
And I hope we can do this again soon. Yeah.
Let's do it monthly.
It's so important, and there's so much to learn from one another. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you guys. Thank you all. I really appreciate this.
Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.